Hey, everybody. Sorry for the delay and welcome to this week's edition of Alley Talk. Big shout out to our host last week, Alec Costaval, who took over for me while I was unavailable, traveling for some work out in Denver for the AFC Divisional Round playoffs. We're not here to talk about football. We're here to talk about baseball. We're here to talk about your fighting Phils, if you will. And of course, there's plenty to discuss when it comes to them and their actions last week. Felt like they were pretty close to bringing in one Bo Bichette. Unfortunately, at the last moment, he turns on a dime and finds himself up 95 in Queens, joining the New York Mets, wearing the blue pinstripes instead of the red. Not what Phillies fans wanted to see. If they're going to miss out on him, it would have been tough pill to swallow and will be a tough pill to swallow for them now that Bichette has moved to the Mets. So that's where we're going to start, is kind of a continuation of that conversation. I know that my guy Alec was on the news last week, but it kind of feels like to me that the fan base almost got duped or tricked themselves a little bit, right? So the team in the front office kind of talked about how they felt like their roster was pretty set and that they were going to be comfortable moving forward with what they have currently. And then you turn around and this opportunity for a guy that nobody really thought was an option is all of the sudden there. And he's a young guy and he is an extremely talented player, has led the American League in hits twice and was among the hit leaders last year despite missing 30 games last season. It would have been an impact bat to put at the top of the lineup, whether he's batting first or second or fourth or third or whatever he ends up hitting. Really, really strong offensive player, and plenty of connections here with the hiring of Don Mattingly, but not enough for the Phillies to get the job done. Sad for the Phils in that case. The Mets, obviously, they continue a significant rebuild, and we'll get into the show a little bit later about how the Mets fare against the Phillies and if they are the new class of the NL East. But to stay focused on the Phillies, I think that they have. If this Bichette chase never happened, I think fans alike, maybe they're not feeling amazing about the offseason, but they're feeling better than they did before they missed out on this guy, right? And it's a guy that I don't think anybody really thought that they would be able to sign him until those rumors started, and it kind of seemed like it was a done deal. I mean, to the point where it was a extra thing that nobody really expected to happen, and all of the sudden, Dombrowski thought it was so close to being done that he called it a gut punch when he found out that Bichette left. Steve Cohen and people in the front office for the Mets, even kind of using a term that the Phillies fans have started to really get irritated by. He said, we're not going to run back the same group when we have a season that we did last year. And obviously two different places. You have a team that didn't even make the playoffs versus a 96-win NL East champ, only team that worried the Dodgers team and the Phillies. And we can expand on that in a little bit as well. But the Mets did what they had to do. They did a big revamp, and yes, they have a little bit more money in the ownership than the Phillies necessarily do, and they are working on trying to flip the roster and make it back to the playoffs instead of continuing to build like the Phillies have. But you look at it this way: the Mets last year, their starting lineup, you had Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Brett Beatty, and Francisco Lindor in the infield. You have Brandon Nimmo. At the end of the season, it was Tyrone Taylor or Cedric Mullins and Juan Soto in the outfield. Young stud catcher and Francisco Alvarez behind the dish, and Starling Marte as your DH, who I've always liked. Maybe he had some down years there, but he's getting a little bit older. Anyway, so they lose out on Pete Alonso, and you think, man, Mets are going to Mets. and they go on this spree of making moves to change the culture in the clubhouse, to change the way that people think about their team. And all of a sudden, that infield goes from Alonso, McNeil, Beatty, Lindor to Lindor. Really, the whole lineup, only three guys are back. Alvarez, Soto, and Lindor from last season. You're talking about Jorge Polanco, and he's not a one-to-one replacement for Pete Alonso, but Marcus Semien has a bigger track record than Jeff McNeil, and he's a Gold Glove winner just last season at second base. So you greatly improve your defense, and you have a very professional hitter from the right side in there. Bo Bichette now comes into play third base, and we can talk about the comments on whether it's a one-year deal, and that's how they're acting. Francisco Lindor, we know his pedigree, MVP candidate every single year. And then maybe in the outfield, they'll have, Carson Bench, who's a young kid. Maybe he'll be in the outfield. They trade for Luis Robert, a guy who's been a talking point for Phillies fans. They go out and trade for Luis Robert, giving up some decent picks for him. But the thought process for Phillies fans has always been get him out of that terrible atmosphere in Chicago, get him into a winning club and see him rebound. Well, that's what the Mets are doing, right? They're bringing in this guy who's high energy, who's shown that he can do it in the past, and he will be manning center field. The defense hasn't gone away. The offense is what struggled, and when you have guys like Lindor and Alvarez and Soto and Semien and Bichette in that lineup, there's a little less pressure on you. So Luis Robert and obviously Juan Soto in right field, so they have two new outfielders, same catcher, and then Beatty or Vientos or some sort of combination of guys will be that DH. Oh, yeah, and then they go out and get Freddie Peralta as well. Now, they paid a premium, 2 top 100 prospects. I don't know if that's something that the Phillies would have been willing to give up necessarily. They really don't have the depth outside of the top 3 in order to afford that. But they go out and get Freddie Peralta, who has a 3.30 ERA in 5 years as a full-time starter. He was 5th in Cy Young voting last season. He's averaged 172 innings the past 3 years, so not some of the concerns that you had early in his career have seemed to go away or dissipate. And you're talking about a guy, a team with a full influx of energy. They did lose Edwin Diaz to the Dodgers. Dodgers keep getting better, but they go out and they sign Luke Weaver, 175 Ks, almost 4 Ks per walk over the last 2 seasons. Devin Williams, he had a bad year last year, but he has a 1.89 ERA combined across the 4 seasons prior to that. So the Phillies did a great job of revamping that bullpen. They brought in Brad Keller. I think they'll feel the loss of Matt Strahm, especially early if Tanner Banks doesn't continue to take the next step. But you really solidify the right side. Kirkring goes from your first guy out of the pen to maybe a guy that you only need in dire straits or dire situations where your starter gets kicked early. He might be a 5th, 6th inning guy now instead of a 7th, 8th inning guy now. Not that he'll stay that way permanently, but you get to kind of let that guy get back in the swing of things after the way that last season ended, and give him an opportunity to slowly work his confidence back up with some other arms to kind of bounce ideas off of in Keller and Durant. So I think that they did a great job of revamping the bullpen. But look at this on the surface. I'd say that worst case scenario, especially now after getting Bo Bichette, the Mets probably at minimum break even, if not a little bit improved defensively and offensively. Their starting rotation got better. They still are lacking depth, but the top end of that rotation is really good with the young kids that they brought up last year with Senga and now with Freddie Peralta leading the way. And yes, they lost Diaz, but bringing in Weaver and Williams, if they look anything like they have in past seasons, that is an improvement at the end of that bullpen, even if it's not. I know that they traded for some arms mid-year like Helsley and Rogers, but those were guys that a lot of people thought would be one-year flyers anyway. So you have a consistent force at the end of that bullpen now. Similar to what you had with Diaz, but now you have 2 guys to go to who have closing experience as opposed to Diaz, who, yes, might be the best closer in baseball, but obviously moved on for what he perceives to be greener pastures. We know what the Dodgers did. They brought in Kyle Tucker. We talked about Diaz already. So they have done nothing but improve their chances at a three-peat, which would be absolutely wild. They're breaking baseball. I mean, if you didn't think that CBA was going to lead to a strike before the Dodgers offseason, after all the deferred money, after the $700 million and trading for whoever you want, whenever you want, bringing in Kyle Tucker on this crazy high AAV, bringing in Edwin Diaz, stealing him from New York, I think that you are all but guaranteed to head to a labor stoppage, and there will be sweeping changes in the major leagues. Not guaranteed, but that's my first thought on everything. First comment in, Little G Griffith. I'm a big fan of the Phillies. Aren't we all, man? Aren't we all? That's why we're here, right? That's why we're here talking the Fightins, talking the Phils. Just want to thank everybody again for joining. I know it's been a couple weeks since I've been on. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Make sure you go check out Alec Costoval there as well. And if you do want to if you enjoy what you hear from me, well, I did start a brand new podcast. We released 2 episodes a week. Typically, on average, this week is only 1 because we did 3 last week. But I started it with my brother, Brotherly Glove Podcast. Go follow us on Twitter at Bro Glove Podcast, on Instagram at Brotherly Glove Podcast, on YouTube at Brotherly Glove Podcast. And you can find us anywhere and everywhere that you find your podcast. So Apple, Spotify, YouTube, you name it, we're there. And we talk all Philly sports. And a little extension. We did a lot of college football coverage, had Chris Felica, the Bear from Bear Bets and Fox Sports. He was on there last week. So if you do like yourself some college football, make sure you go give us a listen. That being said, we're here talking PSN. We have some great folks from PSN in here, including my guy, Matt Watson. I'm your biggest fan. Matt, I'm your biggest fan, man. Thank you so much. So shouts to the Phillies team. Matt is our managing editor for the Phillies team. So make sure you go give him a follow on Twitter and check out his media company on YouTube as well, Matt Watson Media. Just kind of, there's not a whole lot of new news to talk about, right? But we talked about how much the Mets got better, and ultimately, I think the overarching question is, are the Mets now better than the Phillies on paper? I think that ultimately the starting rotation for the Phillies when Wheeler is back is still deeper, despite the loss of Ranger Suarez, still a stronger unit overall. You are lacking an important piece in Ranger, and it's a lot of pressure to put on a young kid like Andrew Painter to be able to replicate what Ranger has done. But you're going to have, to start the year, you're going to have Chris Sanchez, who finished second in Cy Young voting. You're going to have Aaron Nola, who I think last year, we're going to have to see, right? But last year was such an outlier for his career that I would only imagine that he's done everything he can to focus and get back to form this year. You'll have Jesus Luzardo, who they'll likely have to extend soon if they want to keep the starting pitching depth going. And then you'll have Taijuan Walker and Andrew Painter. Walker was awesome for the team last year. He did anything and everything that they needed. Long man, short outings, a swing guy, starting some games, in and out of the rotation, and he never complained. He's a gamer, great guy to talk to as well when you're down at the ballpark. Really does take the time with the media, and he's always positive. No matter what he's going through, always a positive guy. He brings that dog mentality to the bullpen when he's out there too. Nothing but good things said about him. When I spoke to other relievers, Matt Strahm said that it's not an easy transition, but Taijuan really just jumped at it and was like, hey, what do I need to do to make this adjustment and just start, and got to work right away. It's really easy for a guy who's been a starter their entire career to get frustrated and complain and be worried about their spot on a team when they are forced in and out of what their job is, and their job is ever evolving and ever changing. But he embraced it. Maybe behind closed doors, he was feeling a little different. Who knows? I'm not here to speculate on that. I'm here to tell you that this guy embraced his role, and he really does have confidence in this club and knows what they can do when they're all playing at their best. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and how long they are without Zach Wheeler. I think the team is hopeful that it'll be a short period of time, but with this thoracic outlet syndrome, it really is different levels for each player. I know that I think it was Merrill Kelly from the Diamondbacks. He had a similar issue and came back pretty strong. Brad Keller had a similar issue, and it took him a little while to bounce back, but he's obviously come back strong, earning a big deal with the Phillies for this offseason. So we can get locked in the minutia all day, but to me, we went over kind of how the Mets have evolved a little bit. We all know what the Braves are. Little Braves note: Ha-Seong Kim was injured slipping on ice in Korea, so they did sign Jorge Mateo to kind of fill the gap while they wait for the recovery. But he's supposed to be out for 5 to 6 months, so they won't see him until late in the season. Kind of how they traded for him late in the year last year. They won't have him until later in the year. But so yesterday we recorded our episode. New episode of Brotherly Glove dropped today, and my brother, he went over kind of the Fangraphs projected WAR for the two teams, and overall, it's a drastic difference. So I'm gonna share with you guys what we went over as far as the projected WAR for the two teams coming up this year. So let me bring that up for you guys real quick. Gotta get this in a different. There we go. Sorry, guys, doing this on the fly. Apologies again for being late. Had some issues with supposed to be traveling to Denver tomorrow. My flight was canceled right before I was supposed to get on, so was struggling to figure out what was next, and then had to panic to get set up when I had lost track of time trying to track all that. So anyway, we have our Fangraphs projected WAR by position here, and you can see. Phillies at catcher with JT coming back, projected for 2.2. Alvarez expected to take a jump up at 4.1. First base, no surprise, Polanco versus Harper. I would imagine Harper should be favored there, and he is, according to their projections. Additionally, we'll talk about kind of how we feel about them in a little bit, but Harper 4.0 feels like an under projection for me. I expect a big year from Bryce. So, but regardless, that's one for the Phils. And then you look at the other spots, second base, which will now second base, which is now Marcus Semien, who's a Gold Glover. A lot of that war is going to come from the defensive end. He had 2 years in a row down offensively, but you're talking about two Gold Glove caliber second basemen there competing against each other, where most of their war is going to come from the glove, less so the stick. And then obviously Stott ended up in a platoon last year, so we're really going to have to see, can Sosa mash lefties like he did last season if they go that way again. Shortstop, Lindor. This isn't a discount on Turner. You see how big that WAR is, 4.4, hits leader last year, but 5.3 for a potential MVP candidate every year as well. Lindor probably a little more explosive offensively the last 2 seasons, but Turner's right there, but not a huge difference, but still favoring the Mets. Third base with Bichette. I think if it were Beatty, this would be a little closer. 4.6 they're projecting for Bichette. Alec Bohm, a lowly 2.6 compared to the 4.6 they're projecting for Mr. Bichette. Now, the 2.6, I think that's a pretty bold prediction. I do expect a bounce back from Bohm, but he was 1.5 last year in an awesome season. The season before, where he slashed 280, 332, 448 with 15 homers and 44 doubles. He had a 3 WAR. So I don't know if 2.6 is where I see him landing, but I do feel like a bounce back is due for Bohm this season if they don't decide to make another surprising switch here as a club, depending on who's available. Rumors about Eugenio Suarez and some other folks out there. Maybe the Phillies feel like they need to pivot. Not sure about that quite yet. In center field, they actually have projections where Crawford would end up with a higher WAR than Luis Robert. I know Luis Robert's had some down years. I think Phillies fans are hoping that the guy that they've wanted in the clubhouse the last 2 seasons does not end up outperforming Crawford. I think they want the young kid on their club to do well. This could end up breaking even. It's basically breaking even, the slight favor to Crawford if all things go well for the young outfielder. And then in right field, 6.1 for Juan Soto. You're not going to pass Juan Soto no matter who you signed. Unless they shocked the world and got like Kyle Tucker rather, or something along those lines. 1.2 expected from Adolis Garcia and whoever else may spend time there. Obviously not considering that Nick Castellanos still has to be removed from the roster at some point, whether that's via trade or cutting him. He's not considered in those projections at this time. DH, I'd be stunned if they had somebody at DH who was out projecting Kyle Schwarber, and that number does look a little low, but that's because he's not playing defense. So Fangraphs just take defense and speed into account, two things that he doesn't necessarily have as a full-time DH. They do obviously, and I think understandably, have the starting pitching out projecting the Mets by a good bit when it comes to WAR. That is the strength of this team. No matter whose name is in that lineup, the strength of this team has been starting pitching. And then the relief pitching, that revamped bullpen should be very dangerous. One of the better bullpens in baseball, out projecting. Overall, if you add the numbers up, they still have the Phillies slightly better, but we'll have to see what happens, right? We'll have to see what goes on with this team. So looking at everything that we talked about, Dombrowski's comments, and I think it's a little GM speak, but Dombrowski's comments were that the team is content. And we have a comment in the YouTube chat, concerned by Dombrowski feeling content with the lineup that they have. Cade on some big, missed out on some big names out there, but other than the minors, is there available talent that we can add to shore up the bats? Yeah, I'm not really sure who the target should be. Eugenio Suarez is a name that comes up, I think, clearly based on what the target that they had and the fact that they've been rumored to have looked into potential trade partners for Alec Bohm the last few seasons, that they feel like infield, whether it's Bohm or Stott, is an opportunity to upgrade. So obviously some of the bigger names at third base have already moved on or been signed somewhere else or traded, whatever the case is. Just taking a look at some of the available free agents at third base. So mentioned Eugenio Suarez already. Obviously a lot of swing and miss, so he'd add something that this team already has plenty of, but a huge bat from Suarez. Offensively, he almost hit 50 home runs last season. His worst seasons came in Seattle, which is known to be a tough hitter's ballpark. He was really explosive with Arizona and obviously really good before going to Seattle the first time. So that would be an intriguing option. I think you could probably take a one-year flyer on him and try and rebuild some value. I'm not too worried about what happens after that, right? I think a lot of people go, oh, well, then what do you do with Bohm? If you have a target in mind and you think that Eugenio Suarez makes this team better or more dangerous, however you want to phrase it, you have to consider getting that guy in the building first and figuring out everything else later, right? I think that they did a similar approach with Garcia. They're taking a similar approach with giving and committing a spot, at least in the first half of the season, to a young outfielder. Despite having Nick Castellanos on the roster, they are committing to a new outfield regardless. So I think that there are some options, and ultimately, I think that, back to the comment real quick, I think that the thing is that they are, it's just GM speak, right? They said something very similar. Dombrowski was saying things similar, like, we're all set, before the rumors ever started on on Bichette, and they didn't even have JT in the building yet, right? So they had offers out to him, but they felt pretty good about where they stood at the end of last season. Again, reports from Jason Stark is that people close to the Dodgers felt the only team they were truly worried about on either league were the Phillies. The Phillies outscored them in that game. They absolutely dominated that dangerous lineup with their pitching staff. They just couldn't get the timely hitting. And they'll have to, a lot of people think that they have to address that. They could get lucky. They could get lucky with bounce backs from Alec Bohm. If he gives you 55 to 60 extra base hits and hits 280 and hits 330 with runners in scoring position, like he has in the past, like I'm not saying crazy things here. He's done that in the past. Can he be your 4-hole hitter? The JT, I don't expect him to all of a sudden go back to what he was previously, but can he take a step forward? He had a pretty down year last year. Bryce Harper, yes, it was a little surprising, but Dombrowski's not wrong that it was not a prototypical elite Bryce Harper season last year. I would assume he will be bouncing back, and his numbers will look a lot better. So the middle of that lineup could look better just by guys playing more like themselves. Whatever was bothering Bohm all year, I'd be stunned if he didn't turn back into an extra base hit machine. Not saying it has to be 40 plus doubles, but if he gives you 35 doubles, 2 triples, and 15 homers, 90 RBIs out of the 4 hole, and hits well with runners in scoring position like he has done over his career, you're talking about a lineup that's very dangerous, even if he's not a prototypical 4 hitter or the big name that fans might have been a fan of. Ultimately, I do say all of that but I want to acknowledge the fact that yes, it's true that it doesn't matter how good these teams are, they are or how good these names are, rather, they need to come up with big hits in the postseason. So I'm not ignoring the regular season. I'm a big fan of enjoy the good teams while they're here because I've lived through so many bad years. So enjoy the good teams while they're here, the ins and outs. I'll allow myself to get frustrated at times, but it's not going to ruin my mood. To me, to me, you enjoy the good years while they're here, and you hope that you win at the end. But the way to keep it in perspective for me is you're allowed to talk about them. You're allowed to criticize the team and the players if you feel like they could have done things differently. At the end of the day, these dudes are human, and one team wins at the end. One. That's it. Doesn't matter who's on your roster. One team wins. Are you going to tell me that the last Phillies run, that 08 team was the best version of the Phillies for that run? No. 07 was just as good. 09 might have been better. 10 and 11 were certainly better. And the one year they won was 2008 on the back of Cole Hamels and Joe Bland. They had 4 aces 2 years later, and they couldn't win. They couldn't get out of the first round. So it's not always about go get the big name and bring him in here. You can win over 100 games and get knocked out in the first round like the 2011 Phillies did. Who's to say that this team doesn't win 94 games this year and goes on a run because they are hitting at the right time, because Harper's back to being who we know he is all the time, because Bohm rebounded, right? And maybe it's, okay, great. If Bohm has a great year, like, why? It's his last year of his contract. There's no reason to think that he wouldn't be able to bounce back, especially with big money on the line. CBA does expire after this season, so that's going to be a big part. And another comment in the YouTube, Bichette played the Phillies to get the Mets to overpay impossible the guaranteed money ahead of a lockout or strike. One interesting thing that happened during Bichette's introductory press conference, a reporter, and I mean the stones on this reporter to ask this question, reminds you that Philly's not the only place that's a really hard media market, right? Asks them, with the opt-outs after year one, do you consider this? Are you and your agent treating this like a one-year deal? And every other question that was asked, Bichette, well, and just went right into it. How do you feel about it? Oh, well, throughout the process, the Mets made me feel like this is the place I had to be. And New York's a great market, and they're committed to winning, and blah, blah, blah. Hey, what about it? Are you treating it like a one-year deal? And the dude shuts his mouth and turns right to his agent and the front office and has no idea what to say. And to me, that screams he's ready to walk, especially if the CBA would be more favorable to him next year. But if he has a solid year, there's no reason to think that, like, I don't have faith that this Mets team is all of a sudden a World Series contender. I'd say that they are closer to where the Phillies were. If the Phillies came down a little bit and they jumped up a lot, I'd say you're going to have tighter competition between those two teams. But there's a chance that Bichette walks and then they bring him in next year on a long-term deal. Who knows? I know that that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about 2026, not 2027 and moving forward. But you have to consider that this could be a one and done, and all of a sudden next year you're looking at the Mets like, man, you missed out on everybody you wanted, and the one guy you got left after a year, he got paid and you got played, and he goes and plays somewhere else. So it would be interesting to see what happens there. It will be interesting to watch that offseason. And if he has a down year, then the Mets are stuck paying $42 million a season for a dude who's having a down season. So, ultimately, Phillies fans, yes, it stinks to watch him, and I'm sure when he comes to town in June, he will get booed off the field. I fully expect that. However, I do think that I don't think that the Mets are better than the Phillies, but I am concerned that the Phillies, they still have areas to address. Clearly they need depth at starting pitching. You don't know what's going to happen with Zach Wheeler. He could be back in May. He could be back in July. he could be back even later than, if he's back at all, he could be back later than that. Obviously, the priority with him is his health first and foremost, but you're talking about a pretty serious procedure. Even though pitchers have come back from it just fine, it's a pretty serious situation for him. So priority for him is health. Speaking from a Phillies perspective, you don't know when he's going to be back. The Aaron Nola, you don't know what he's going to look like this year. So there are question marks, but if everybody pitches like they should, I think that starting rotation is good. But they need to go out there and get somebody. And I'm not talking about like the Ron Hell level of player. I think you need to go get a guy like a Chris Bassett, right? Somebody who would be comfortable going into a swingman position later if you need him to. You need to go get someone like that. You need to go get a starting pitcher that has poise, has experience pitching in big moments, not a quad A guy like they've done. I don't need, no offense to Michael Mercado, but I don't need the guy that they turn to be Michael Mercado. I don't need it to be Tyler Phillips. I don't need it to be Colby Allard, for example. The Phillies need a solid back end of that rotation. We know what they're going to start with. We went over earlier in the show, but they need a solid end of that rotation to keep them above board until Zach Wheeler is ready to go. Plain and simple. And I think that to me is a priority. You need to go get that. I'm fine with them bringing back JT. I know that the money's a little bit much, but I'm going to kind of repeat back to fans what they always say when there's a big name available, right? They were up against the next tax apron before they brought back JT and before the rumors started about Bichette. And all the fans say is, well, it's not my money. Go get Bichette. It's not my money. You're a rich owner. Go get Bo Bichette. So then why do you all of a sudden care how much JT Realmuto's making? If you want them to spend without concern, then why are you concerned that everybody on the pitching staff has referred to this guy as the backbone of the team? Why do you care what he's paid? He came back. He is an integral part of this team. Yes, he's a little bit older, but he's an integral part of this team. He is an integral piece of the pitching staff, which is the strength of this team. Pitchers and coaches alike have raved about how much they have learned about pitching from this guy. And you're concerned that they paid him 15 instead of 12 because it would have made you feel better? Oh, why can't we do a high AAV opt-out for Bichette? Why can't we give him $42 million a year? And then out of the other side of your mouth, you're complaining about JT Realmuto making 15. He's an integral part of this team. Yes, they do need to find a long-term solution there. They do. He's getting older. I get it. But two things can be true. Two things can be true. So why are you out here complaining about money spent on a guy that you know what he brings to the team beyond what he does at the plate, and you're also saying, give these guys whatever they want? Who cares? You have the money. It's not my money. Get out of here with that. I'm sorry. If you are a regular viewer of Alley Talk, you know that I am not normally this fired up about this, but I cannot stand the discourse around JT Realmuto. He is basically a coach on the field. Every single pitcher has talked about how much better he makes them. The strength of the team is the pitching. It's simple. It's simple to me. Who cares how much? They could have given him $50 million a year for all I care if I'm using everybody else's logic. If I'm using the logic of the typical Philly fan, who gives a crap? Go give the guy money to get him in here. You target him, go get him. That's what they did. Would you have been okay? If Bichette came in here for a year, it would be awesome, right? Everybody would be happy about it. And then 2 months into the season, they'd be complaining about Garrett Stubbs and Rafael Marchand hitting a combined 180 to start the year. Love both of those guys, by the way. But just speaking theoretically, I can hear the callers on the hot take radio stations in Philadelphia. I can hear them already, and I can hear the hosts on one of them drumming it up. Yeah, we got Bo Bichette, but we didn't address the catcher, huh? Should have just given JT what he wanted, huh? Well, here we are. They gave him what he wanted. You happy now? God, man. Sorry, I don't get this fired up, Matt. I need you to come in here and tell the people that I'm never like this. I'm never like this. This is ridiculous. Anyway, back to the comments. JT is a known. You get exactly what he brings. Compensation was correct. The team had a price and years, and they got it. JT did his due diligence. Couldn't agree more. Maybe in an ideal world, would you have rather have paid him 2 years, $20 million? Sure. But in a thin catcher's market, when the position is already thin across the entire league, you got to go spend money to go get a guy. They want to collect top-tier talent. JT isn't as good as he once was, but he is the top of the catching market. You go get your guy. Nobody would have been comfortable with Stubbs and Marchand behind the plate unless they made drastic, sweeping changes and brought in a lot of big names offensively. Nobody would have been comfortable with it. That 2 months in, when Christopher Sanchez took a step back because he doesn't have JT behind the plate, and Aaron Nola looks even worse because he doesn't have JT behind the plate, and Zach Wheeler comes back and is visibly and audibly frustrated because he talked about how good JT is and how he doesn't have to focus on anything except execution because JT takes care of all of it. People would have been up in arms, regardless of their record, regardless of how good they are, if JT wasn't here and the pitching staff took a step back. And now we don't have to find out because the guy we know that staff trusts the most, that goes above and beyond what catchers do in today's game. He's back in Phillies pinstripes. So you should be damn happy about that they didn't miss out on him while they were distracted by the carrot dangled by Bichette's agent. And I don't think that's anything against Bo Bichette. I think a lot of times agents are doing a lot of this stuff. It stinks that they missed out on him. But please do not forget what this pitching staff has said about this guy, what fans have said about this guy, what this guy has done year in and year out, what his teammates have said about him, and what he brings not only to the clubhouse, to the field, to the prep, all of it. This guy does it at an elite level. So his bat took a step back. Everything else is still elite when it comes to JT Realmuto, and they got their guy. Woo! I need a drink after that. Commenters, if you guys have been here before, you know I don't get fired up like that. I always end the show with "This is a place of love." We're not hot take. But if I listen to this garbage hot take radio in Philly again, I'm going to be... I'm just... it's driving me crazy. Water break. Water break and posture check, baby. We're all sitting down looking at our computers. It's good to make sure. Shout out my guy, Ryu Carr, a great gaming streamer. He always does water break and posture checks. So stealing that from him, shouts to Ryu Carr. But regardless, ultimately, I don't think that the Phillies are worse. I'd say they probably, in the rotation, they took a big step back. They did. Losing Ranger Suarez, which I think everybody kind of assumed was happening. Losing him is not going to be easy for them. But having a guy like that who can help usher in the young Andrew Painter, who can help usher in anybody else that they bring in as depth, who has been a vital piece and can help work Zach Wheeler back in because he doesn't have to focus on anything except executing the pitch, right? That's a guy that you need in your clubhouse if you want to compete. If you want to compete, that's a guy you need. Comment from my brother, Johnny Fisher from the Brotherly Glove podcast. How we doing, Johnny? If they're not worse, where are they better? Well, one, I think the bullpen, they're significantly better. I think that they not only did they add a big name in Brad Keller, they added depth throughout. They added optionable guys, and they went from a core at the back end of that pen that was unfortunately known to give up the fly ball at a high percentage. You now have a ton of guys with near 50% or higher ground ball rates. You have revamped the way that the approach of that bullpen. Instead of strictly being power, you brought in guys who pitch from both sides. You brought in a sidewinder. There's a lot of different looks all of a sudden in that bullpen, and everybody is really good at forcing hitters to drive the ball into the ground. So I think big upgrade in the bullpen. They did take a step back in the rotation. I think that the drop off from Ranger to Painter or Ranger to Walker in the rotation is significant. So I wouldn't say that those are balanced out, but and maybe I'm over inflating my confidence here, but I expect a better season from Bryce Harper, and I think that that's not a crazy thing to assume will happen. I expect a better year from Alec Boehm, not a crazy thing to happen. I expect a decent year from the rookie in center field in Crawford, and I think that he's as good as what they got out. Maybe outside of the hot 6 weeks or 8 weeks from Harrison Bader, he's better than what they had there to start last season. I think Garcia is going to be as good, whether it's offensively similarly and defensive, a significant improvement. I think you're talking about a better option out there with higher upside. I didn't have a lot of faith in Max Kepler. He's a great guy. I met him, got to speak to him a few times down at the ballpark. He's a great person, a great human being. I didn't have a lot of faith when they signed him, and we saw what he did for the majority of the season. I have more faith that Garcia at least will give you consistency defensively, and then you love whatever he's able to give you offensively after working with Kevin Long, and then you're kind of the same everywhere else. So I expect not significant rebounds, but I think you're balancing out the loss of Ranger with a significant improvement elsewhere in the pitching staff. And then I think breaking even or slightly better than you were to start the year, obviously including some rebounds there. So I think that ultimately they are the biggest difference in the roster to me is going to be losing Ranger Suarez, and that's to not put a lot of pressure on Andrew Painter. You want to give him the time to figure some things out. So I'm not going to assume that he's going to step in and be the uber prospect that we all thought he was going to be. I do have faith that Crawford's athleticism, his speed, and his ability to put the ball in play will be an asset for this team, even if he's hitting 8th or 9th. And then I do expect Boehm to look more like he had in prior years than he did last season. So I think ultimately they're probably breaking about even, Johnny. That's where I would say. And if you're breaking even, winning 94 and maybe instead of 96 games during the regular season, I still feel pretty good about that about this ball club, and I think that keeps them in first place in the National League East. All right, I think my ranting and raving about JT, man, I'm sure that Johnny wishes I brought that on our episode today. But anyway, the ranting and raving about JT, I think I got enough out of that. We talked at the beginning of the show about how we felt about the Mets, and if they're better, we know what the Braves are. They should be competitors every year. They have a lot of big names in that roster. They're going to need some starting pitching help as well, but they look really good. So not a whole lot less left to talk about. I don't think that the Phillies are done. I don't think they're going to be in the big name conversation. I don't think they're even going to target someone like Harrison Bader unless they're going to commit to, a Bader Marsh, or like Marsh becomes the 4th outfielder or Garcia becomes the 4th outfielder, and you just kind of mix and match daily. But I think you're talking about some depth pieces, maybe some additional minor league or quad A type relievers that you can rotate in that have some options as you need. Same with the starters. I would love for them to go get someone like Chris Bassett. I don't think they're going to be in like the Framber Valdez conversation at all. Just because like if you're going to jump in that conversation, to me, it'll feel like a panic move at this point. Because if you're going to be in that conversation, why not just target the guy who's been with you, who is one of the best postseason performers in Ranger Suarez. So guys like, Jordan Montgomery's out there. He's a guy who I think you could probably take a flyer on. Chris Bassett, he'll be 37 to start the season. He's a guy I think that you could probably bring in. Walker Buehler, who they ended up signing in September, and he was on the postseason roster. Zach Gallen's available. He has some local ties. Maybe that's something that they could work out. There's some other names. There's Wade Miley, Herman Marquez, Patrick Corbin, Tyler Anderson, guys like that. I don't know if they are big difference makers for me. A guy whose name popped up, who's a big name, big trade for the Dodgers a couple years ago. Michael Kopech, he used to be in the rotation, ended up being a bullpen arm, was really good for the White Sox as a closer, pretty good for the Dodgers in relief when he first got there. I think his numbers ended up being below average, but he'd be an interesting target if you want another swing man who's just looking to rebuild some value. Jose Quintana, it might be worth bringing him in just so he doesn't crush you anymore, right? Like the classic, bring him in so he can't beat us. Carlos Carrasco, if you want to take a flyer on someone like that. I mean, there's a lot of names out there. No, but like that is the area where I think they'd be shopping him, right? Take Framber out of it. I think that you're talking about guys who are either on 1-year deals who are willing to add options to their contract so they can go up and down. Guys who know that they'll likely be in a swingman role once Wheeler comes back and are comfortable in that role. Bassett did it last year for Toronto, so maybe that's something. Comment again from Johnny. Love to see Bader back, move Crawford to left where he's better suited, and Marsh Garcia and right. I actually think that if they were to bring back Harrison Bader, that would be the ideal layout. I think that people need to be realistic about what Bader brings offensively, but those 2 months after the trade to Philadelphia were basically the 2 best offensive months of his career. But I would like to see, I mean, that would be fun, right? I think that just because you tell a guy, hey, we want you to be the everyday right fielder, just like they told Kepler, doesn't mean that you have to, especially for a veteran, doesn't mean that you're committed to that, right? And if your concern as a club is, well, we want to give Crawford the room to go, that could be interesting. So it would matter what the contract is. I think he'll be a guy that signs soon now that Belly signed back with the Yankees. He was kind of the stud potential center fielder, and then everybody else was kind of waiting to see what happened from there. So Bader, it could be an option. He declined the option. You might end up with a similar cost. So it might be another $10 million to bring him back in, which again, during my JT rant, I'm not too worried about. I'm sure fans aren't worried about either. It'd be interesting to see Crawford in left instead of having the pressure of throwing a young guy in there who might not, according to scouts, be best suited in center field. I think they want to see if he can do it at the major league level. If that athleticism plus determination can result in him being a plus defender out in center. 21 years old, plenty of time to still figure it out. Not necessary. It's not like when you moved prospect Odubel Herrera from infield to center field. It's not like, it's closer to what Ben Revere was to me. Like Ben Revere might not have been the perfect center fielder, but his athleticism made up for a lot of mental mistakes that he could have made. This guy being even younger, I think, and with his awesome family connections, I think he could be solid there. But I think Johnny's lineup could work pretty well, and I think it gives you more confidence in the lineup as a whole if Garcia and Marsh are splitting. Marsh, since coming back up from the minors last season after his little rehab, he was incredible, but mostly doing his damage against righties as expected. So if they have another platoon, that could be interesting. Big energy guy too, that would be fun. Another comment here. Bader, locker room energy guy, career average not great. He's mid at best. He wants good player money off half a season of above average play. Well, we'll see what the money's like. We'll see what the money's like if he where he ends up going, and if that's something that the Phillies could have worked out. If he goes somewhere else, that's another reason for the hot take artists on Philly radio to go off and get a fan base that should be excited about a team coming off 96 wins that has Bryce Harper and Trey Turner and Zach Wheeler. They should be excited about this team, and instead they'll be pissed all season long because they're told to be pissed by the people on the radio. Anyway, nice little comment from the Brotherly Glove Pod. So crazy. I know those guys. If they signed Bader, he would instantly be the best outfielder on the roster. I don't think that's too hot of a take. You might be right there. We're going to have to see what, Fangraph's projections think that Crawford's going to be better than the guy that the Mets just traded for in Luis Robert, and they gave up a lot to get. So it could be an interesting move. Another loose Phillies connection. Sir Anthony Dominguez, right before the show started, signed a 2-year, $20 million deal to join the Chicago White Sox. They have made some interesting moves to rebuild some value. 2-year deal to me tells me that they might be hanging on to him instead of a potential trade deadline target. There's going to have to be somewhere for Nick Castellanos to go. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit. Obviously, it's going to depend on what happens this week. But next week on Alley Talk, we will talk about some potential options. There's been rumors. Ken Rosenthal today said that, not that there's rumors that these teams have reached out to the Phillies, but that the Marlins or the Padres could be a potential fit for Nick Castellanos, especially with Casty doing some infield work. If they felt comfortable enough to give him a shot at first base, the Padres need to fix their first base problem. and they have some in their top 30. They have some catching prospects. Marlins not so much, but we'll take a look next week about what the options are for potentially two birds, one stone kind of move. Can we move Casty to a team that has a depth of catching depth, a depth of catching depth? Don't really know how else to phrase it, but that's kind of my thought process. There is, we'll dive into that a bit and see if we can concoct a potential trade for a team that needs some offense, whether that's the A's or the Pirates or the White Sox or whoever. We're going to take. My goal will be to try and partner with a team that has a lot of young catching depth, and see if you could potentially pry one of those pieces away with Nick Castellanos, eating a lot of the money along the way. But again, I personally big fan of Nick Castellanos, but it's clear from the messaging from the club that his time in Philadelphia is through. Another big discussion point here. The voting for the Hall of Fame is final. Announced earlier this week. Your newest Hall of Famers, Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones from the Braves. I know he played other places, but known mostly for his time with the Braves. Jones and Beltran both make the cut. But we want to talk mostly here on Alley Talk about how our former Phillies, excuse me, how they fared. So we're going to dive in. I have some notes here that I'm bringing up for us about where they finished as far as the voting is concerned. The big four names, there's guys like Howie Kendrick, Hunter Pence, that not really a good shot at making it, if you ask me. There's four core Phillies. Four core Phillies. Sorry, dislocated finger. It keeps coming. It feels like three fingers instead of four. Hall of Fame voting. So the top Phillies fared in this year's voting. Chase Utley received 59.1% of the vote. You need 75% to make it in. At this point of him being on the ballot, he's actually has a higher percentage than Andrew Jones did, which is good. I think that's a positive note for Utley, and that's a significant jump as well, almost a 20% jump. He was at 39.8% last year. I think it's almost guaranteed that Utley will be in his peak and a little bit beyond, is some of the best numbers from a second baseman in Major League history. So, yeah, I think that he has a good case. Abreu, also a significant jump, but he's been on the ballot for a little while. He went to 30.8%, 19.5% last year. He's a guy who I think was always really good. Like, I think when I watched Bobby Abreu, I was like, damn, he's a good player. And then when you look at all of his numbers at the end of his career, you're like, damn, like, this guy had a damn good career, all things considered. His best ability was availability, and the fact that his skill set didn't really drop off suddenly as he got older. It dropped, obviously. Every player skills diminish as you get closer and closer to 40. But he was consistently good from the second he got in the majors throughout his career, through his tenure with Philly, with the Yankees, with the Angels, with the Mets. Wherever he went, he seemed to perform at a high level and was a important part of every lineup he was in. So it would be cool to see Abreu get in. There is a case to be made for him. There's a lot of people who the combination of on base and extra base hits, there's not a lot of people above him. When you're talking about like the combination of walks and extra base hits, it's like Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., and a couple other guys are the only outfielders who have done some of the combination of numbers that he's put up in his career. I don't think he's going to make it, but had a damn good career either way. With him being having been on the ballot so long, I just don't see a path for him to make it there. Jimmy Rollins, 25.4%, a jump from 18% the year prior. He has a lot of work to do. He is a little bit more of, I'd say he never quite had the peak that Chase Utley had, but he was consistently good. Might have been the best defensive shortstop in an era with a ton of really good defensive shortstops. You're talking about he played the same time as young Derek Jeter, as he played the same time as A-Rod, as Nomar, as Omar Vizquel, as there's a lot of guys that he played alongside of that their names kind of come up first when you think of elite shortstops. And then on top of it, he didn't walk a ton necessarily, but man, like he went in there with an attitude of I can change the game on the first swing. Kind of like what you saw with Schwarber, but you expect it more from Schwarber. Jimmy wasn't going to take that high fastball because he knew he could drive it out of the ballpark. His OPS plus actually considers him kind of an average player overall. He has an MVP, a World Series. He was the heartbeat of that era of Phillies. Um, I think with a late push he could make it, but it's going to be a challenge for him. Again, up to 25% from 18 last season, and then Cole Hamels, in his first year of eligibility. He ended up with a pretty decent percentage, 23.8% his first year on the ballot. I think when people think of Cole Hamels, they don't think Hall of Fame, but you're talking about a guy who had 2,500 strikeouts and like 900 less innings than a guy in CC Sabathia who just made the Hall of Fame himself. Paul Hembekides, Hembo, as we like to call him, as everybody likes to call him, friend of the show, friend of the pod, friend of the Brotherly Glove pod as well. He had a great thing, if you want to go look it up, about kind of comparing. He said that now that CC is in, he thinks that Hamill should be a shoo-in to make the Hall of Fame. And it's kind of like the catalyst. Okay, we're in the new era now, and you're not going to have as many 300 win guys or 3,000 strikeout guys, but his changeup is one of the greatest changeups to ever be thrown in baseball. I mean, that's what we're talking about with Cole Hamels' changeup. So, I think that it could be interesting. I'm pulling it up now what Hembo said about him, and I'm not going to play the audio, but just some of the stuff that he has listed here. Talking about 62.3 career WAR for Sabathia, only 59, so only 3 WAR behind for Hamels. And again, you're talking about 900 less innings in their career. He had a 1.23 ERA plus versus Sabathia's 1.16 ERA plus, a 85 opponent OPS plus, 87 OPS opponent OPS plus from Sabathia. He has a better K rate, a lower walk rate, and a much better postseason ERA, including that World Series MVP that he won in 2008. So his first year on the ballot, 23.8%, and you're talking about a guy in Sabathia who his first year was elected with 86.8% of the vote. I don't think he makes it in next year, but I think that now that you have that guy and you've established, like, look, when I watched Sabathia, I thought that he was a future Hall of Famer as well. He got to some of these elite numbers later, but postseason ERA of 4.3 almost versus a 3.4 for Hamels. Hamels has a no-hitter under his belt. He, again, a World Series MVP under his belt, and he's only 3 WAR behind Sabathia with better peripheral numbers overall. I don't think there's a reason why he couldn't get in there. That's my opinion. I love what Hembo gave us and has given the people about that comparison. Sometimes, and we love Paul, but sometimes he can get too much in the advanced statistics. To me, this one's pretty simple. WAR is as advanced as he's going to get. Everything else, Hamels had a better career in 900 less innings than CC Sabathia, and I think he's destined for a spot in the Hall. Little comment from the people before we wrap things up. Problem with Phillies in the Hall of Fame voting is that we tend to be a lunch pail team without the glitz and glamour of other teams, even when our numbers are better or equal. I don't know if other people treat it that way, but I do think that, the people looked down on Cole Hamels when he first got to Philly. He was the California kid, the beautiful chiseled jawline, the long hair, and that didn't necessarily fit in with the vibes, but you go out and you help win a World Series and you're going to be loved in the city forever. So excited for him to have a nice debut on the ballot. And I personally feel like he will be a guy who makes his way to Cooperstown. Well, guys, that about wraps up the show for me. It was a great show. Once again, I appreciate everybody out there for tuning in. We went over, are the Mets better than the Phillies? Are you content, just like the front office is claiming they are? What other moves would you like to see made by the Phillies before the season starts? And of course, we just wrapped up our conversation on the Phillies and how they fared in their Hall of Fame votes. was a great episode, great content from the people, great comments from the people. Love all of you. Love everybody listening out there. Appreciate you all. We love ball. That's what we're here for. We're here to talk ball, to have fun with each other, and to have a polite, normal discourse. Who would have thought? That's all we need. A polite, normal discourse instead of freaking out on each other and all this hot take garbage out there. Even though I went a little off the rails earlier, it was not the norm when you are here in the alley for Alley Talk. I will say hi to Liam. Hi, Liam. We'll say hi to Liam for you. Make sure that you give us a follow at Philadelphia SN on X, at Philly Sportsnet on Blue Sky, right here, Philly Sports Network on YouTube. And like I said earlier, the new Brotherly Glove pod covering all Philly sports, myself and my brother, 80 years of Philly sports fandom and 30 years in sports media covering it up close and personal. So we'll have some fun with you guys over there as well. Go find us anywhere you find your podcast. Brotherly Glove pod. Appreciate everybody's time. Love you guys, and we'll catch you next week right here on Alley Talk.